doubt that each man is justified in using force if necessary to defend himself against physical harm, against theft of the fruits of his labor, and against his enslavement by another. Indeed, the early pioneers found that a great deal of their time and energy was being spent in defending themselves, their property, and their liberty. But in order for man to prosper, he cannot afford to spend his time constantly guarding his family and his property against attack and theft, so he joins together with his neighbors and hires a sheriff. At this precise moment, government is born. The individual citizens delegate to the sheriff their unquestionable right to protect themselves. The sheriff does for them only what they had a right to do for themselves, nothing more. The principle of collective right, in this instance, collective protection, its reasons for existing and its lawfulness, is clearly based on individual right. Now let us go a step further in the question of man's right to delegate power. Suppose Pioneer A has one horse. He also wants another horse, but does not have the money or other means to buy one. Pioneer B has 3 horses, and Pioneer A decides that he would like to share in his neighbor's good fortune. Is he entitled to take one of his neighbor's horses? Obviously not. If his neighbor wishes to give it or to lend it, that is another question. But so long as Pioneer B wishes to keep his property, A has no just claim to it. If A has no proper power to take B's property, he obviously cannot delegate any such power to the sheriff. Even if everyone in the community desires that B give his extra horse to A, they have no right individually or collectively to force him to do so. They cannot delegate a power they themselves do not have. This means that the proper function of government is limited to those spheres of activity within which the individual citizen has the right to act. By deriving its just powers from the governed, government becomes primarily a mechanism for defense against bodily harm, theft, and involuntary servitude.
First of all, the federal government has no authority to license what is already protected in the Bill of Rights. Secondly, and the power in America is always supposed to remain with the people.
Right.
That's you and me, folks.
You know, 20 years ago we said this can't happen in America.
Right.
Now they see it happening.
Well, they're training them.
Our motto is that tyranny cannot come to the door of any American unless it comes in uniform. And that's true, Dennis.
I think that's the most important aspect of being a sheriff, is that you are elected by the people of your county to serve their needs. I think that the people of this country have the great advantage, frankly, of being able to select their chief law enforcement officer for their county and hold him accountable.
Right. Back to the aiding and abetting of this theft by sheriffs who were too limp-wristed to exercise their authority. Really the key in this is for sheriffs to stand up and exercise their lawful authority and quit going around with their hand out for another grant, welfare grant from the government.
The simple fact that the federal government does not own all of us and does not own the states and cannot control the states and cannot tell your sheriff what to do. And the issue, I think, is an important one. Are we going to maintain our freedoms in this country, or are we going to allow our own government to continue to crescendo out of control? Right. The issue we were fighting was the one that we had damage on, and that is jurisdiction.
Right.
Does the federal government own your local sheriff? Does the federal government have the authority and the constitutional jurisdiction to tell your sheriff what to do? The only way that can happen is if the sheriff acquiesces and goes along voluntarily.
Which many do.
Which many do.
That's the unfortunate part. Right.
Regrettably. And I am one who still believes in the best way to solve an issue is on the local level. There's 3 areas that the Constitution allow for federal law enforcement. Right. There's 3 areas. And this is on Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. felonies committed on the high seas, counterfeiting,
Right.
and treason. Those are the only 3 crimes that are constitutionally allowed for a law enforcement authority
On the federal level.
at the federal level.
Right.
Right.
And they don't.
And back to this, the gun issue, there's no greater evidence that our Constitution is in trouble than it is with the gun control issue.
Mm-hmm.
If our government, which is specifically forbidden from instituting gun control, it's constitutionally forbidden. And if you look at the history of our country and look at what the Founding Fathers said about the Second Amendment and about gun control, you will know how far out of control and run amok our own federal government is.
It is.
And I'm so pathetically, absolutely sick of my own government being the entity that is trying to steal my God-given freedoms away from me.
Right.
They are there to protect our freedoms. The proper role of law enforcement is the same as the proper role of government, and that is we are here as government officials to protect freedoms. Did you know that your police officers are supposed to protect freedoms,
True.
individual freedoms?
Right.
And yet most police officers have been reduced to revenue collectors. You know, write the tickets, and gun ownership is a personal choice. It's not my government's choice whether I have a gun or not. And the people in my county, if they had guns, wasn't none of my business unless they had intended to commit a crime with it. And then people are going, oh, well, isn't it your job to make sure they don't? It really is not. I'm not supposed to go door to door and say, what do you plan to do with that gun?
Right.
Do you have any other weapons in the house that you want to commit a crime with?
What about these rocks in your garden?
And you're not thinking about stabbing your wife tonight with a butcher knife out of the kitchen, are you?
Right.
That's not the role of law enforcement. It's not. And in fact, the book right here, that's a great segue into the book, The Proper Role of Law Enforcement. And this is the book that I wrote so that law enforcement officers would remember their oath of office. The oath of office requires that your local law enforcement authorities continue to keep their oath of office to uphold and defend the United States Constitution. That's what this book is about. It says, no more compromise. If you take all my rights, take them all. But I'm not going to piecemeal my rights away or cut the tail a little bit at a time until the whole tail's gone, and then you go after the rest of the body. No. The answer is no. If it's really about freedom, why would I compromise? Because if I compromise, that means I'm giving up some of my freedom. In America, you want me to give up some of my freedom because we have problems all across the country? But to answer his question, you 16-year-old teenagers or you freshmen and college students, if you want to be free, you have to know the truth. And you have to be educated, and then, after you know the truth, you can defend your rights. But you can't defend what you don't know.
But they still...
What can I do as a police officer? What can I do as a soldier to help stop this headlong rush into a socialist dictatorship, totalitarian system in America? And we said it's very simple. Just obey your oath. They made you swear an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, protect the people's rights and their liberties. Just do that. And a despotism or a tyranny cannot happen. Enforcement officer actually is there to serve and protect the system from the people. You see, so it's 100% different today than what it used to be.
Well, we've got a shot of these two officers now. Which
That's
is
right.
which?
Okay, the one on the right is the peace officer that served and protected the people even from a system that had gone awry, in political leaders that would usurp powers and so forth. That person was sworn to protect the people and their rights and their liberty, which all officers still today are. But when you go into the police academy today, you're not trained as a peace officer there to serve and protect the people like the officer on the right. You're served today as you're being militarized, you're being given military equipment, you're being given military training, you're becoming a part of the state, and you actually are trained to violate your oath, and instead of serving, protecting the Constitution and the people, you follow all orders regardless of what they are, and you become a servant and protector of the system. Which is, as you know, about 20 years ago, we threw God out of our system, and today the state is God. So it's very important for the police officer and soldier to be trained that the highest authority in the land today is government, and they're there to serve and protect government, because if government falls, then the people will suffer. See, so there is a lot of wonderful things when you begin to study the founding documents of this country and the law. And the lawful system we're supposed to be under, the common law and those things, is that you have police powers that come from nowhere but the people.
Right.
You see, the people, there is no police power unless you go to the sovereign people. And actually, the way police officers started is towns had a butcher, a baker, and people, the blacksmith and the banker and the school teachers, and they didn't have the time to go and try to run bad guys out of their town. So what they did was delegate their right to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment to a person called a town marshal or sheriff. Now, that person, by going to work for the farmers and the teachers and the people in the community, had no power to carry a weapon as their servant unless the people gave them that power.
Right.
Isn't it silly today that now the police say the people have no right to have a gun, but we do?
We do, right.
Well, see, it's ridiculous, because if the people don't have a right to have a gun, your servants sure don't have a right to have a gun. But so what we have is also they have learned that to protect themselves, bureaucrats and appointed officials or elected officials, to protect themselves, they've come up with this plan to incorporate the state, to incorporate the cities, you see, and towns. And once you do that under corporate law, a corporation cannot have an army, an armed army, to go out and deal with the citizenry.
Right.
It can't happen in corporate law. So really, your only lawful law enforcement person constitutionally is the county sheriff that is voted in by the people. So your state police is a corporate army. Your city police are corporate armies that, under the law, corporate law, aren't allowed to be an army and be armed. So it's interesting, but we're learning a lot. You know, and so that's why the sheriff can honestly say, I am the only lawful law enforcement person in this whole county. And if the state police come in and try to usurp his powers and do things, the sheriff can say, no, you're not going to do that in my county. If the federal officers come in and try to usurp the jurisdiction of the county sheriff, he can say, just like Sheriff Dave Mattis in Montana said, no, you come into my federal compliance office that I just set up in the county sheriff's office, and you show your paperwork, and if what you're doing is moral and lawful, then I'll help you do it. If not, get out of the county. And so we're learning a lot about the way it should be under the law. And all we're doing is talking about upholding the law.
So a sheriff that really does have man parts,
he has power, tremendous power that the people have delegated to him. That's right. He could stop this kind of tyranny.
Even today.
I mean, we've got... Right now today. We don't have the knowledge and what we can do while it's still not to a point of violent revolution, which is coming. Because as the government becomes more and more abusive and oppressive, it always happens that somewhere the people that are being oppressed and abused will finally stand up and fight. Now, we don't, any of us want that, because I've got a lot of wonderful brothers and sisters in uniform that don't know that they're violating people's rights and they're causing this oppression, and we need time to educate them, just like we need time to educate the private citizen, so that we can stand up in unison nonviolently and redress our grievances in a nonviolent fashion with our government leaders and take back control. But it's education.
It's education.
Where we're
but how
at
do we
this
get our
time.
government leaders to even listen to us?
Well, they
as
listen.
of right now, there's not much of that going on.
Well, we need to take back the counties, and that's something that you and I talked about. Do not participate in the fraud of electing Huey, Dewey, or Louie as your president, because they're all the same.
Right.
The ones that have millions and millions of dollars behind them to get elected are their guys. So it's a fool's game to spend your wealth, your time, and energies electing their guys to Washington when you can take over your county and you can vote in people in your county that will uphold the 10th Amendment and protect you from federal encroachments on your rights and your property, state encroachment on your rights and property, by putting people that love God and love the Constitution and understand how we've gotten where we are and how to recover the system in those offices in the county. The most powerful office in the land is county elections.
Right.
Because it's closest to the people, too.
And it's
this daily. We educate our police and soldiers, and we get many hateful letters from our brothers and sisters in uniform, too, where they'll say nasty things. You guys are revolutionaries. You guys are anti-government. But I love the letters that always end and say, if this is true, prove it. Because, of course, we can.
Sure.
We've got 17 filing cabinets, not drawers, cabinets filled with every bit of documentation to prove to any hard-headed police officer or soldier or any private citizen exactly the facts and the evidence to prove everything that you've said on this show and that we say in our publications. Every day, Dennis, I say, praise God Almighty that we have more police and soldiers realizing, like we didn't 20 years ago, that we, by violating people's rights, by doing everything government tells us to do, usurping the power and the rights of the people to government, we are building a socialist slave system for my 3 kids and 7 grandkids. And so many police and soldiers today are seeing that and saying, wait a minute, I know I want my pension. I know that I should shut down, be quiet, and not make waves, and I should do exactly what I'm told because I might lose my pension or I might be persecuted and ostracized. But they balance the freedom of their own children and their posterity to standing up and speaking out. And guess what? They find that it's, of course, their choice to stand up and speak out against despotism and usurpation of the people's rights. So this is a wonderful time to see many joining us today that didn't 10 years ago because they couldn't see that this can happen in America.
Well, it is happening. The office of sheriff, Shire Reeve. Now, Shire Reeve is keeper of the county, Old English.
In Britain 1,000 years ago, the sheriff was called the Shire Reeve, or the keeper of the county.
Keeper of the county. Okay, the office of sheriff, Shire Reeve, characterized in Anderson on sheriff's corners and constables as one of the oldest offices known to the common law system of jurisprudence, originated in medieval England. The office is certainly the oldest county office in the United States, even older than the position of Justice of the Peace, with over 1,000-year history. The office is truly a constitutional and common law office. There we are. It originated out of common law. And so what you're saying is, if they elect you, you need to find out what they want and provide that. That's your job, is to provide what they need.
Absolutely, and certainly to protect, and certainly protect their property and their rights and those various things that the sheriff should be doing.
What happened here is so unusual. This man was elected 5 times, and correct me if I'm wrong, stood up, raised his right hand, swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States and the state of Nevada to protect against all enemies, foreign and domestic, as do all sheriffs that are elected into office. But you took it a step further. You actually do it.
Oh, yes.
That's the difference. Because, like I say, I've read the Constitution, and I've watched what a lot of sheriffs have done or not done, and they do not uphold that oath. They do not uphold the oath to defend the Constitution of the United States or the Constitution of the state of Nevada. But you're doing it, and you're not really appreciated for your talents by outside government agencies, are you?
No, I think that I'm looked at as somewhat of a rabble rouser, or the person, a malcontent, maybe by some of the federal agencies, and that's not to say all of them either, to be absolutely fair, but certainly I'm looked at with disdain by some of those federal agencies, particularly those administrative kind of agencies.
But that's because you obey the law and you force them to obey the law. Is that it?
Well, yes, and moreover, I take the side of my constituents, the people who have provided me with my living for many years in Eureka County, have been good enough to allow me to do the work that I like to do, and I'll stand up to anyone in order to protect those folks.
Their rights.
And their rights.
Right. And that was in, I guess, the crime bill where was signed not too long ago, where they're going to put 1,000 or 100,000 new cops on the street. The federal government's going to provide. Well, give me your insight on that, or give them your insight.
I think what I have to say about that, it's noble to say that we're going to provide 100,000 more police officers in the United States, and there are certainly communities who need that help. There aren't enough police officers in a lot of places. Fortunately, we don't have that situation in Eureka County. But what my concern is, in regard to that, is that that's done through block grants, etc. And so the federal government gets a lot of money together and they throw it at the problem, which they're kind of famous for doing. Each one of those police officers now is tied to that federal money. And my concern is that each time that a law enforcement administrator like myself takes federal dollars, and frankly, I don't take any federal money in regard to those kind of functions, to financing salaries for police officers, because it places me in a position of having to, better yet, it places the federal government in a position to dictate the policy for my office to me. And that takes away that accountability that I have to my constituents, to the folks that elected me to office several times. And I don't think that the bureaucrats in Washington have the knowledge or the wisdom to administer law enforcement in Eureka County. Frankly, the bottom line of the people of the various counties, and the people of Eureka County particularly, of losing that control and having then no recourse in regard to their destiny. In terms of who are they going to hold accountable? Some bureaucrat in Washington? We know that doesn't work. The bureaucrats aren't responsible to anyone, frankly. I go right to the very first book of laws that was written in the state of Nevada for the territory in 1861. And I go to the very first paragraph of the very first paragraph that absolutely adopts the common law in the state of Nevada.
Right. And I'd like to read it because it's there, and I will read it.
It says, even Chapter 1, Section 1 of the laws of the Territory of Nevada in the very first paragraph reads, the common law of England, so far as it is not repugnant to or inconsistent with the Constitution or laws of the United States or the laws of the Territory of Nevada, shall be the rule of decision in all courts of this territory. Furthermore, the laws of the Territory of Nevada were subsequently ratified by the first Nevada legislature and remain in full force and effect today. This says Nevada is under common law.
And I didn't just write that. That is absolutely an excerpt from it, and that's right, verbatim with the very first paragraph of the laws of the Territory of Nevada. Nevada wasn't even a state. The Territory of Nevada. The very first paragraph says that Nevada adopts the British or the English common law. And truly, the sheriff is a common law officer. You'll find him, as we discussed earlier, provided for nowhere in the United States Constitution or the Constitution of the state of Nevada. Mm-hmm. His authority is assumed under the common law.
This is one of the reasons that has happened, and one of the reasons, in fact, it's the underlying reason why we have so much chaos throughout the state of Nevada on this issue. Why people's property is being stolen right and left. And not only here, but in other states throughout the West, too. Why the BLM and the Forest Service are running over people right and left. The fundamental reason why that's happening is because we have a virtual total breakdown in the exercise of lawful jurisdiction by the state and the subdivisions, the counties.
Right.
We have sheriffs, and just like in the Raymond Yowell case, you have a sheriff that any way you want to slice that, and a brand department aiding and abetting the theft.
That's right.
Now, this is a total breakdown of any lawful structure in the state. I want to go back to. And that goes back to the aiding and abetting of this theft by sheriffs who were too limp-wristed to exercise their authority.
That's right.
DAs that take a powder when something like this comes down. You know, when Ben Colvin's cattle were stolen here a few months ago?
Yes.
And we looked around for the sheriff and the district attorney in Nye County. You know where they were? Fishing in Alaska until things quieted down. Now, when you've got those kind of people in elected office, you're going to have cases. I asked my sheriff, I said, if you took the same position with the bank over here across the street that you've taken with the livestock industry here in the county, and if you let it be known that a certain class of people could rob that bank anytime they wanted to, how long do you think it would be till it was robbed? And robbed repeatedly. It's aiding and abetting the crime.
Exactly.
And as long as you have sheriffs that, again, are too limp-wristed to exercise their lawful jurisdiction and authority. I know here several years ago, I was asked to speak to the Western States Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. And there was a sheriff from one of the Nevada counties came up to me and he said, I'm having all this trouble with the Forest Service, this, that, something else. And I listened to him and I said, well, what you're going to have to do is exercise your lawful jurisdiction. You have the jurisdiction. You're the chief law enforcement officer in the county. The Forest Service has no law enforcement authority. You need to understand that and let them know it. That'll take care of your problem.
Right.
You know, he would never do that. He never would do it. The end result was the stealing of Raymond Yowell's cattle. Okay? And where we have seen sheriffs that do nothing more than send them a simple letter and say, boys, I'm the sheriff. I'm the chief law enforcement officer in this county. Mm-hmm. And there's not going to be any impoundments, any theft of property on your part. If any of that is done, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it with a lawful court order or warrant. And if you have a problem in this county, you come to us with a court order or a warrant, we'll serve it for you. But don't you go around acting like law enforcement officers, because you're not. And where we've had sheriffs do that, such as Clark County, such as Owyhee County in southern Idaho, and there's some in Utah. There's one in Wyoming, one up in Wyoming where the sheriff put him in chains, took it to the 10th Circuit to get him And the 10th Circuit upheld him, said he did just what he had the right to do.
Right.
So if we can put people in office or get these ones in office to stiffen their backbone enough to exercise their lawful authority, this stuff will end.
Right.
Because where the sheriff stands up, this stuff ends.
Sheriff, but evidently in Utah, there was a little lady that had her cattle seized by these same yahoos. The sheriff went down there and loaded up her cattle, drove them back home to her ranch, and they never messed with her no more. So, again, part of the solution is for these local guys to stand up and be what we pay them to be.
You know, that is so true. Because really the key in this is for sheriffs to stand up and exercise their lawful authority and quit going around with their hand out for another grant, welfare grant from the government. And there is no such thing as free money. Every time you take one of those grants, there's strings attached. And so many of these sheriffs have taken so many handouts that they are absolutely compromised and paralyzed as far as doing what they were elected to do.
There is no...
This is evil. And I have to remember back in 1843 when Alexis de Tocqueville came to America. And he said, you know, I looked for the greatness of America. What was the secret to her greatness? And he went through several things. He looked at her Congress. He looked at her great ships and trains in commerce. He looked at the agricultural fields. He looked at the justice, the courts. But it wasn't until he went in the churches. And he understood then that America was great because America is good. But then he said, when America ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. And you know, it's up to every single one of us, not the government, not your congressman, not your sheriff. We can't even depend on them anymore. But it's up to us to take that stand and fight for our own rights.
We have to.
And the rights of each other.